Hey guys, and welcome to another brand new video. In this video, there's some pretty big news going on over here when it comes to the brand new PlayStation 5 emulation. Now, if you guys do or do not know, this has been some pretty big and groundbreaking stuff that's been ongoing for the past few, well, I'd say about a year or so, where we've finally been having a chance to go and, well, have people do a deep dive into basically homebrewing their consoles, having a chance to potentially even emulate their consoles. And if you guys do not know, I'll do like the really quick recap for that one. But basically it's just a really big next change that we're seeing this technology slowly being cracked, and people are finally figuring out very slowly how to launch things like PlayStation 5 games and emulate things like PlayStation 5 games. So we're going to go talk about this because there's another really big, now huge upgrade when it comes to this future finally actually happening. Now, I do want to go and give you guys a fair warning. We're not 100% there yet. Granted, I'm sure actually Sony would try to do everything in their power to go and avoid it, because once we get into other different types of things like the Dolphin emulators and other various types of emulators in the first place, because I think even right now you can literally go and emulate things like on the Switch as of right now due to how old the console is. And that's also kind of related towards like the Wii U, etc. So anyone can pretty much play any type of Switch game, I think, from my knowledge. It's technically illegal if you don't own the actual ROM itself, like the actual copy of the game, but in theory you can find a lot of these games online, and can play these just in general through emulation. And that's what they're trying to do over here for the PlayStation 5. So we're going to talk about this. Make sure you guys are subscribed, notifications on Twitter and Twitch stream down below if you guys want to follow, but love to have you guys there. Maybe be doing some drinky drinks up on Twitch, and of course, give me your thoughts and comments down below. So, really quick recap, if you guys do not know, emulation basically just is, you have the video game files. So think like all these online things, or back in the day when you used to play like a Mario game. You would technically have the files and like the memory and all that type of stuff inside the disc, like those discs, or random like little cartridges, whatever, depending on the genre we're looking at, would literally have the game physically filed on there, and the files are saved on there. And then obviously people would have a chance to go and then interpret those same exact files into like your computer, into like online sources, into things like emulators, etc. And well, obviously it's kind of hard because you do not want to have these games being ran. Like these companies like Sony, they don't want to have a day one emulation maker because, well, obviously people are going to go and emulate the games. It is legal, first and foremost. It is legal to emulate games out there. Like that's a normal thing. It's totally fine. But the part two of things is if you don't technically own the original source code, then you cannot emulate the code. That's just how the legality for it works. So once again, like people would still do it regardless and maybe just lie and say, yeah, I own PS5 games, etc. So it's kind of a weird thing. I'm more of a big fan of game preservation, and I don't mind emulation overall because people can actually change up their games and fine-tune their games even up on, say, PC. So a good example is that when Tears of the Kingdom came out, some people within the first week were emulating Tears of the Kingdom publicly out there to go and have a chance to make the game in 4K. They did things like removing cell shading textures. They made things like really, well, different, like all over the place. And it was a better gaming experience. Like they look at 4K Zelda. Like imagine 4K 60 FPS Zelda. The game was like 720p 30, like if we were lucky, let's be honest here. So that really rare experience makes games better. So what happened now, with all that like preemptive discussion gone, the PS5 lib hijacker can now actually load games now for their pretty much like homebrew / technically like emulation type console, from my understanding. Saying Elscry's lib hijacker is making steady progress into becoming a homebrew loader for the PS5. Now, this isn't like game breaking yet. This isn't like, oh my god, you can now go right out there and emulate games day one on your console, but it's getting there. Like the technology is slowly getting cracked. We also saw a lot of big improvements when it comes to emulating games. We made a video maybe like last week or so, where there was a way for people to then use emulations and custom core game files to improve games that were previously 30 FPS to 60 FPS. So not alone just like having a chance to run games like Horizon or God of War Ragnarok or any of those types of games. Part two is that they actually might have a chance to even fine tune and make these games better and run more steady or run more efficient. So as of right now, they did have a big release saying Zakowskow announced today on Twitter that the latest revision of this brand new code can now even load and start launching games. And if you guys have ever, well, it's not the full-on game yet, this is probably one of the biggest things out there, because that basically means that they have the technology to somehow start launching the thing. It's maybe a good example for this is like, say you have a car. You have your ignition key. Once you start turning the ignition key, there's a bunch of like checks and balances you have to go through to see if like the engine, even ignites. It could even start. But after you go and do all that testing for months upon months, at some point you had that key and you plugged it in your car and you turned it and like the engine start revving and like basically it's going. that means like you're on the very first step. Now, there's still maybe other things, like you may even still have to have wheels. You may need to go put gas. You may need to go and charge the battery, whatever it might be. I don't know. I'm trying to get some good metaphors for you guys. So it's there. Like it's like the process, like the ignition is starting, but you still have an entire road trip to go through to get through. Like hopefully you guys get the good idea of what I'm trying to say for this. So this is huge. So there is still a long way to go for the PS5 running homebrew stuff, and PS5 retail games are apparently implied here. So the retail games themselves would be like God of War, Horizons, future things like Spider-Man 2, Wolverine, etc. Which, by the way, it is illegal. I do want to remind you guys, it is illegal, but if you guys own the ROM, who's going to tell you don't own the ROM? There's more if you actually own the ROM itself. It's 100% legal in terms of game preservation, and you own the actual thing itself. So they go and said the tools we're talking about in this article require more so of a hacked PS5 in order to run, and that's another part too, is that sometimes you need to be running your console on a very specific firmware set. Like there's, I believe, 2 major big firmwares out there for consoles that make it so you can actually run and homebrew and do all this type of stuff. Like to me, this is very, very intriguing. Because like it's almost there, like it's getting there. It's still technically weird. It's still like a few like little side steps. It's not like easy retail. You just plug in your console and do it like you can with the PC. But either way, it's an intriguing process. So what actually is this lib hijacker? So lib hijacker is a mechanism to run separate processes or homebrew on your PS5, escaping the initially hacked process either by WebKit or BDJB, which you guys may have heard about in my other videos. And this means, among other things, that exiting the original WebKit and Blu-ray player process doesn't actually close the exploit anymore, so running a game officially or through homebrew while still being in the hacked context is now doable. So this is like just another huge major step of them having a chance to start emulation or having a chance to be more fine-tuned in the internals for the console themselves. Like I said, a reminder, Sony's not usually too fond of this because they lose money. People are not buying the games with it. So in other words, this means things such as running a homebrew, modding games at runtime, or more are now a possibility. Think homebrew games, patches, cheats, 60 FPS modes, and more. So what I was trying to say before, we were seeing those early accesses of games getting 30 FPS to 60 FPS. This also means that there might be games for like cheating, which may not be necessarily good for the overall gaming community, but a lot of this type of stuff would be more so for like single player games or RPGs, or think things like mods they might have a chance to install either from outside sources or whatever it might be. This is really cool. So as latest revolution, you can think of libjacker as the very first homebrew leader or homebrew enabler or hen for the PS5. So Astral demonstrating that even under the constraints of the PS5 hypervisor and the kernel XCOM still active, a lot of things can still be achieved with the exploit we have for the firmware 3.4XX and the 4.0, which I think that those are the 2 I mentioned before. So basically, they're trying to say that this is the first step. Like, this is a huge groundbreaking achievement over here for the PlayStation overall. Saying the Astral has also committed changes to libhacker's work in progress branch almost on a daily basis. Even pushed up a big change today that adds game app support, and the game app support in question lets libhijacker load an ELF file from the PS5 homebrew or game sent remotely from a computer, prepare it for loading with relocations and the like, and then run it with the bare bones debugger attached to it. Interestingly, there is no PS5 games to be tested at the moment for most people. There are no full-fledged homebrew apps for the PS5 yet, which is why this one's even a bigger deal, because it's brand new type of stuff. Like, that's nuts. It's actually really big in the first place. It's just cool. It's the first time they have a chance for it. So basically, they have a chance to either send it like remotely from their PC or prepare it for loading, as we mentioned before. So they basically have like a debugger after you run this type of stuff for them to run the programs to then have a chance to homebrew your console. So let's say basically there's no PS5 games to be tested. There are no full-fledged homebrew apps for the PS5. This is why it's like a big thing for this one. And the interesting chicken egg scenario here of having to build the loader and the homebrew apps in parallel. And as far as retail games are concerned, to their understanding, the only way to dump them at the moment is Slurvlowski's PS5 self-dumper, and that's the tool that only works with that certain 5.03 firmware. A little chance to mention for Uscroll that they've also actually been working on a test too. So as this has all been kind of going and they have a chance now to load games on this PS5 emulation, it basically is kind of like hacked. Like this is like almost like an essential hack, I would say, for the console. And this is like a big thing to allow the next major step for consoles to keep going through. They said I don't actually have anything to do a full test yet because they're basically all building both sides of this. Say a sample is being put together as they don't know any GUI programming. If you're one of the lucky people on firmware 4.03, you can essentially dump your own games to give this a try too as well. So as of right this second, if you guys are somewhat familiar with the scene, you actually might have a chance to even boot up and somewhat emulate these types of style and homebrew style these games with their brand new technology that they're making as of right this second. It's very interesting and very cool to see. So if you guys want to, they have the sources on the websites or their self-dumpers. I myself don't typically run around with this. Like I just like the idea of game preservation, but I know there is some folks that are out there with it. But always be careful if you guys are downloading stuff online. Always be careful. Don't get viruses, etc., etc. And once again, it is a few like separate steps like to be on 4.03, but the fact that we're basically able to just go and start hacking the console, quote unquote, homebrewing up the console, and having more changes makes everything a lot more cooler. So make sure you guys are subscribed with the notifications on. We have the Twitter and Twitch room down below if you guys want to follow. We have all the Amazon links too as well. We might be doing some drinking stuff, so definitely go follow up with the Twitch if you guys are bored. And I want to hear your thoughts and comments down below after you like the video. Love you guys.